You have heard this story your whole life. In Sunday school classrooms with felt boards and paper cutouts, in sermons that painted Abraham as the model of obedience, in desperate moments when you were told to trust God even when nothing made sense, you have heard about the father who took his son up a mountain, bound him on an altar, and raised the knife. And you were told this was faith. You were told this was beautiful. You were told this was the moment that changed everything. But what if I told you that the story you were given is incomplete? That somewhere between the upper room and the printed page, between the original Hebrew scroll and the King James pulpit, something was cut. Not by accident, not by time, but by intention. The mystical layer of this story, the esoteric teaching woven into every word, every action, every impossible moment on that mountain, it was too dangerous to survive the institutional editing process. Because if you understood what really happened on Mount Moriah, you would no longer need a priest to tell you how to meet God. Tonight, you are going to remember what was taken. Not because I am here to teach you, but because your soul already knows. It has always known. You have felt the absence every time you read this story, and something inside you remained unfinished. Every time the narrative ended too quickly, left you too unsettled, too far from the resolution your spirit was reaching for. That feeling was not your fault. It was the echo of what was erased. By the end of this video, you will not just learn about Abraham's test, you will feel the shift that happened in that moment. You will understand the prophetic code embedded in the ram caught in the thicket, and you will recognize why the church could not let this remain. This is not history. This is remembrance. For nearly 4,000 years, the story of Abraham and Isaac has been told, retold, shaped by countless voices, billions of believers, endless repetitions in synagogues, churches, mosques. But here is what almost no one knows. The version you were taught was edited, trimmed, rearranged to fit the needs of an institution that feared the mystical more than it loved the truth. The early church did not preserve the teachings. It curated them. It decided which interpretations you would hear and which you would never see. It determined which layers of meaning were safe and which were too dangerous to survive. And the binding of Isaac was no exception. In the 2nd century, Jewish mystics, known as the Merkabah tradition, wrote extensive commentaries on Genesis 22, preserved in fragmentary form in collections like the Haikalot literature. Described the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, not as a test of obedience, but as a cosmic initiation, a ritual of death and resurrection, a moment when heaven and earth exchanged places. When Isaac saw through the veil, when Abraham became the priest of a new covenant written not on tablets but in the body itself, and in those fragments, scholars found something extraordinary. They found that Isaac was not a passive victim. They found that the ram was not a substitution. They found that what happened on that mountain was not about sacrifice at all. It was about transformation. In Hebrew, the language of the patriarchs, the word used for test in Genesis 22:1 is nissa. But nissa does not mean test in the way you think. It does not mean exam or trial. It means to lift up, to elevate, to raise a banner. God was not testing whether Abraham would obey. God was elevating Abraham into a higher state of consciousness, into a reality where death is not final and the knife does not fall because something greater intervenes. That line in verse 12. By the way, now I know that you fear God was added centuries later by scribes who needed the story to be about fear. It does not appear in the earliest mystical commentaries. It was inserted to reinforce obedience to authority, to make the narrative fit the model of the hierarchical priesthood. But the original Akedah was not about fear. It was about trust. It was about surrender. It was about the moment when you release your grip on what you love most and discover that the universe catches it. And that is why it was reframed. Because the moment you realize that God does not demand sacrifice but provides it, you no longer need the temple system. You no longer need a priest to mediate. You no longer need blood atonement or ritual purity or the endless cycle of guilt, an offering that keeps you dependent on the institution. The Akedah itself becomes the pattern, and you living it become the altar. So they reframed the story. They removed the mystical return, and in its place they gave you a moral tale about obedience. The removal of the esoteric layer was not an accident of translation. It was not lost to time or damaged manuscripts. It was an editorial decision made during the consolidation of rabbinic authority in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And again, when early Christianity absorbed this narrative into its theology of substitutionary atonement in the centuries after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Judaism faced a crisis. Without the temple, without the sacrifices, how would the people atone? How would the priesthood maintain authority? And so the rabbis began to reinterpret the binding of Isaac as the ultimate act of submission to divine law. They turned it into a story about obedience so absolute that it bordered on the absurd, and in doing so, they buried the initiatory key. The Church, centuries later, faced a similar problem. If every believer could experience the revelation that Abraham experienced, that death is an illusion, that God provides the ram, that you are both the altar and the one who walks away, then, what need was there for crucifixion theology? What need for bishops, for sacraments, for the institution itself? And so, slowly, carefully, both traditions began to edit. They kept the teachings that reinforced obedience. They removed the teachings that suggested you could meet God on a mountain without a mediator. They preserved the narrative that made you feel dependent on divine intervention. They buried the revelation that reminded you that the intervention is the pattern of reality itself, and you are the one enacting it. The Akedah was no exception. In its original mystical form, the story was a circuit. Abraham ascends the mountain in dread. He binds his son in surrender. He raises the knife in total release. And then, in the moment of absolute trust, the angel calls, the ram appears, and Abraham sees, not that God stopped him, but that God was never asking for death in the first place. That the test was not, will you kill, but will you trust that life is held by something greater than your grip? But if that understanding remained, the story would do more than comfort. It would activate. It would remind you. It would return you to the awareness that you are not a sinner begging for mercy. You are a child of the living God, breathing his breath, seeing through his eyes, made in his image, not as a metaphor, but as a fact. Now let us return to Genesis 22, and let us decode it, not as theology, but as technology, as a map of awakening hidden in plain sight. The binding of Isaac is not just a story about faith. It is a ritual of initiation, a pattern of death and resurrection, a blueprint for transformation. Each detail, each word, each impossible moment carries a frequency. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. In Hebrew, the word for take is lech lechogo, to yourself. The same phrase God spoke to Abraham in Genesis 12 when he first called him out of Ur. This is not a command to travel. It is a command to journey inward. To take what you love, most your identity, your future, your hope, and bring it to the mountain of encounter. So this instruction is not asking Abraham to prove his devotion. It is asking him to release his attachment to outcome, to surrender the illusion of control, to bring his deepest love to the altar of trust and see what remains. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. 3 days, the pattern of death and resurrection woven through Scripture. Jonah in the belly, Jesus in the tomb, the human consciousness descending into the underworld and emerging transformed. Abraham does not see the place immediately. He walks in darkness for 3 days, in the valley of unknowing, until his vision shifts, and he perceives the mountain not as a location, but as a state. The word for saw here is wrought to see with prophetic sight, to perceive what is hidden. Abraham is not seeing with his physical eyes. He is seeing with the eye that opens only in surrender, the place which God will show you. Not the place God has shown, the place God will show, future tense, because the mountain is not a destination. It is a revelation that unfolds only when you arrive. You cannot see it from where you are standing. You can only walk toward it in trust, and it appears. Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar. In the mystical tradition, Isaac is not a child. He is 37 years old. He is a willing participant. The Hebrew word Akedah means binding, but it also means covenant, agreement, union. This is not violence. This is a ritual. Both father and son are enacting a mystery, stepping into a role that will reveal something about the nature of life and death and divine provision. Isaac, by the way, means laughter, and you are binding your laughter, your joy, your hope on the altar, releasing it completely. trusting that if it is meant to live, something greater will intervene. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. The knife is not just a blade. It is the willingness to let go, the final release, the moment when you stop controlling and start trusting. And this is the moment mystics call the dark night, when everything you love is about to die, and you do nothing to stop it. You surrender. You let it go. You trust the process, even when it looks like annihilation. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham," the double name, the call that pierces through dimensions. And Abraham responds, "Hineni, here I am." Not, "Yes, Lord," not, "I'm listening," but "I am present. I am here. I am available." And the angel says, "Do not lay your hand on the boy. For now, I know that you fear God." But in the earliest layers, the angel does not say fear. The angel says yer, which means awe, reverence, the trembling recognition of the sacred. Abraham does not fear God as a tyrant. Abraham stands in awe of the mystery that is unfolding. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. Behind him, not in front. The provision was already there. It was there the entire time. Abraham simply could not see it until he surrendered. The ram is not a substitution. The ram is the revelation that life provides, that the universe conspires, that when you release your grip on outcomes, grace appears in the form you need. Even the structure of the Akedah itself carries the code. It begins in command. It descends into darkness. And it was meant to return to vision. A complete circuit. Heaven to earth to awakened sight. But without the mystical teaching, the circuit remains open. It reaches the knife but does not return to the knowing. It enacts the binding but does not complete the seeing. It tells the story but does not activate the initiation. And that is the tragedy. The hidden element, the one that was erased, can be reconstructed not through guesswork, but through the fragments that survived in the Zohar, the oral traditions of the Kabbalists, the Hebrew roots that carry the original vibration, and through the logic of the teaching itself. If the Akedah is a circuit, it must complete. If the Akedah is a death, it must resurrect. If the Akedah is a test, it must reveal. And so the hidden element is this. Isaac died and was resurrected on that mountain. Read it again. Isaac died and was resurrected on that mountain. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. In the mystical understanding, Isaac's soul left his body the moment the knife was raised. He passed through death. He saw the heavenly throne. And when the angel called and the ram appeared, his soul returned. He was the first human to die and come back, the first to carry the pattern of resurrection in his body. And Abraham saw it. And that is what changed everything. Not his obedience. His sight. Isaac died. The Midrash records that when Isaac was bound, his soul fled. The Zohar states explicitly that Isaac tasted death, that his eyes saw the Shekinah, the divine presence, face to face. In that moment, he was no longer bound by time, by flesh, by the illusion of separation. He entered the place mystics call Devakatunion with God, the dissolution of self, the return to source. The soul, in Hebrew, is neshamatha, breath of God breathed into Adam. And when Isaac's neshamat departed, he became like Adam before the fall, pure consciousness, pure light, unbound by the knowledge of good and evil. He was in Eden again. He was home, and was resurrected on that mountain. But the story does not end there, because the ram appeared, because the knife did not fall, because the pattern of reality is not death, but life. And Isaac's soul, called back by the voice of the angel, returned to his body. He opened his eyes. He stood, and he was no longer the same. In Genesis 22:19 it says, "So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba." But it does not say Isaac returned. The text is silent, because Isaac did not return. He went somewhere else. Jewish tradition says he went to the Garden of Eden for 3 years to heal. Christian mystics say he went into seclusion to integrate what he had seen. Either way, he was changed. He carried the mark of resurrection. The ram caught in the thicket. The ram is not random. Its horns karnaim in Hebrew, which also means rays of light, were caught in the sevek. The thicket, which is the same word used for the burning bush. The ram was caught in holy fire. It was not a substitution. It was a sign, a symbol. a prophetic shadow of the one who would come, the Lamb of God, the light of the world, caught in the thicket of human suffering, offered in the place of death, resurrecting the pattern. When Abraham offered the ram, he was not replacing Isaac. He was completing the ritual. He was enacting the principle. Life is given so that life may continue. Death is not the end. Resurrection is the pattern woven into the fabric of existence. And when you read this story now, you are not reading history. You are reading your own initiation. You are Isaac on the altar. You are Abraham with the knife. You are the ram in the thicket. And you are the angel calling from heaven, reminding you that death is not what it seems, that surrender leads to provision, that the universe has already placed the answer behind you, and all you must do is turn and see. This is not theology. This is experience, and now we complete the return, not in theory, but in practice. I am going to guide you through a moment of surrender, with space for breath, with space for presence, with space for remembering to land. If you are able, close your eyes. Place one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. Breathe slowly, deeply. Feel the air entering your body. Feel the air leaving your body. And know that this breath is not yours. It is Ruach, the wind of God, the spirit that hovered over the waters at creation, the force of life itself moving through you in this moment. Now bring to mind something you are holding too tightly, a person you love, a dream you are afraid to lose, a future you are clinging to, a version of yourself you are trying to preserve. Bring it into your awareness. See it clearly. Feel the weight of your attachment to it. And now, like Abraham, lift it up. Place it on the altar, not to destroy it, but to release your grip on it, to surrender your need to control the outcome, to trust that, if it is meant to live, the universe will provide the way. Raise the knife, not in violence, but in willingness. The willingness to let it go, the willingness to trust, the willingness to die to your idea of how it should be and open to how it is becoming. And now, the angel calls not from outside, but from within. From the still small voice, from the awareness that has been watching this entire time, from the presence that sees through your eyes and breathes your breath and knows that you are not separate from the source of all life, in any here. I am, present, available, trusting, and now turn. Look behind you, see the ram. See the provision that was already there, caught in the thicket of this moment, waiting for you to notice. The answer you have been searching for. The grace you thought you had to earn. The life that continues, not because you held on, but because you let go. Pause, breathe, let it settle. Feel the words not just in your mind, but in your chest, in your cells. In the quiet awareness that is witnessing this moment, you are not climbing the mountain to meet God. You are recognizing that the mountain is within you. You are not binding your joy to test your faith. You are releasing your grip to discover that life holds you. You are not waiting for the angel to call. You are hearing the voice that has been speaking your entire existence. The provision is here. The ram is here. The grace you have been reaching for your entire life is here. You are the altar, and the offering has already been made. You are the knife, and the hand has already been stayed. You are Isaac, and you have already died, and you are standing here breathing. Resurrected, whole. This is the teaching they could not let remain. And this is the teaching that has now returned through you. For you, as you are awakening to the pattern. You are remembering the truth that has always been true. The test is not about what you will give up. The test is about what you will see when you stop holding on. You are whole. You are held. You are home. If this remembering found you, let your response be silent but seen. Like a torch for others still wandering in the dark night of the soul. Like a comment, a share. Not for me, but for the one who is searching for Mount Moriah tonight, who needs to know that the knife does not fall, that the ram appears, that resurrection is not a doctrine, but a lived reality. Go in peace. And the next time you read the story of Abraham and Isaac, remember, you are not reading about them. You are reading about you. The altar is your heart. The knife is your surrender. And the ram is the grace that was always there, caught in the thicket of this breath, waiting for you to turn and see.